across this quote?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Okay, so in around 1970s, Eric Wolff was the person who gave this quote as well. Okay, now political ecology has been influenced by several anthropological thoughts. At the same time, it has also been influenced by several dominant philosophical thoughts like Michel Foucault. Michel Foucault's idea of power relationship, day to day conflict, day to day negotiation, and day to day you can say alliances between people generally has resulted in cultural patterning and definitive behavior. And this idea of power relationship is something which has come across as a kind of pattern, and it is Foucault's idea of power relation which has influenced the idea of political ecology. Now, Uh, the idea therefore begins that we need to really look into conflicts. We need to look at conflicts from household level to local to even minute, smaller level and to the global level. Okay, now what has happened is political ecology tends to primarily focus on larger forces that hold an influence on the community at one point in time. Okay, just a moment. There is a very short video. I will show you two very short videos, less than 4 5 minutes.
Ma'am, also, could you please write down the spelling of Michel Foucault?
Yeah, yeah, I will. Just a moment. I will write down. Michel Foucault. Did you get it?
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
great. Just a moment. I'm sharing my screen.
My name is Simon Nicholson. I teach in the School of International Service at American University, where
Can
I
you
teach and
hear
write
and see it?
Yes,
Class?
Yes, ma'am.
yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am. Okay, okay.
on global environmental concerns writ large, with a particular focus on global food challenges and questions about emerging technologies. Now, this is a course about the nature of the environmental challenge. We're going to look at how we got into this mess, because we really are in a mess when it comes to environmental considerations, and what we need to do to get out. Uh, Many courses of this type quickly get labeled Intro to Doom 101 or Introduction to the End of the World, because much of the stuff that we're going to be dealing with is pretty dark. When you start digging into the environmental situation, if you're paying attention, you'll notice that things don't look too rosy. So I teach this stuff in part because it's a great intellectual challenge. As an academic, I get jazzed up by thinking about big ideas and big questions. But I also spend time working on these issues because I firmly believe, with lots of other people, that the environmental challenge is the great challenge of our age. Every generation faces its own unique set. In the past, we've had folks who have worked to bring about greater civil rights for certain parts of the human population. We've had folks who have worked to transition us to new technological forms through the Industrial Revolution. We've had folks who have been in generations that have had to fight great wars against fascism and so forth. This particular moment is really, I think, about making sure that human activities are ultimately compatible with ecological realities. If we don't sort this out, nothing else matters. There's a quote from a guy I know named David Orr. David and I taught a workshop together some years ago. And during that workshop, David said something that has kind of stuck with me and resonated ever since. He said that if you consider the environmental situation and you're optimistic, you don't know enough, which is pretty profound and pretty depressing. But he went on to say, if you're pessimistic, then you're ineffective. So the great challenge for us in the face of the environmental situation is to find the sweet spot between optimism and pessimism, between being blindly optimistic and so kind of so pessimistic that we drink heavily and just kind of throw the covers over our heads. That sweet spot is hope. That's the sweet spot in the middle. And so one of the themes that we'll develop together through the course is how to respond effectively to the environmental challenge. If you want to find hope, it comes through more effective action. I'm from New Zealand originally, and New Zealand's a place that's known for its environmental action. New Zealand's a country about the size of Japan in land area. Japan has, more than 100 million people though. New Zealand has only 4 million. And people in New Zealand live lifestyles very much like those in Japan, United States, and Western Europe. If everybody in the world lived like we do in New Zealand, the world would be a mess. And in fact, New Zealand, when you start digging into it, is a pretty messy place. We project this group, but in fact, there are all kinds of problems that the country faces. Wherever you look, you find the same dynamic. In rich countries, environmental devastation that can be transported to other countries and hidden. In poor countries, ecological deterioration that's tied to people living in desperate poverty. There is so much work to do. So it's going to be a great privilege working with you.
Tuning in for the first unit of Culture, Power, and Global Environment. If you haven't already watched the videos welcoming you to the class and explaining the academic integrity policy, I encourage you to press pause now and go back to those videos before proceeding. With that said, I'm excited to officially begin our exploration of how social, cultural, and political differences shape environmental problems around the world. Our first step in this journey is to develop a solid understanding of political ecology. Political ecology is a transdisciplinary field that includes scholars from across the humanities and social sciences, but particularly from the disciplines of geography, anthropology, and history. Though the term has a longer history, the field we now know as political ecology first emerged in the 1970s and 80s as part of an effort by anthropologists and geographers to incorporate political economic forces into their studies of environmental change, and vice versa. This was, in part, a response to the neglect of the environment among political economists, and in part a response to the neglect of political economy among human ecologists. Despite criticism from those who see it as unscientific, political ecology has grown steadily since the 1970s and is today widely accepted as a worthwhile contributor to our understanding of human-environment interactions. The data sources and methods used by political ecologists vary widely, from the sort of ethnographic research that I conduct, to archival research common among historians, to spatial analysis using satellite images. Likewise, the theoretical orientations of political ecologists range from those who work within Marxist historical materialism, to those who mainly employ post-structuralist discourse analysis, to those who, like me, take a more eclectic approach. In this course, we won't dwell on the disciplinary, methodological, or theoretical distinctions among political ecologists, though these matters are certainly open to discussion should they interest you. Rather, we're interested in what political ecologists have in common. So what are the characteristics that unite political ecologists? The first, obviously, is an interest in the environment, and more specifically in how politics shape environmental problems. What this means in practice varies tremendously. Political ecologists study, for example, how shifts in global commodity markets affect the livelihoods of farmers, how biologists relate to the animals they study, and how certain voices take precedence over others in determining whether a given environmental problem even exists. Amid all this topical variety, a few principles stand out. One is that political ecologists look to human cultural behaviors as adaptations to the environment. This means that human societies, even and perhaps especially those often disregarded as primitive, often have highly sophisticated ways of interacting with and managing their environments. As we know, however, human adaptations are not always in sync with what the environment can sustain. And so another principle of political ecology is that degradation of local environments is often driven by forces that transcend the local level. Against the tendency to blame local peoples for environmental degradation, political ecologists draw attention to how local land and resource use decisions are shaped by political economic forces that operate at the regional, national, and global scales. Clearly, then, another common concern among political ecologists is power, and how differences in power shape all aspects of people's relations with the environment. In part, this is about how the costs and benefits of environmental relations are distributed. We study who has control over particular landscapes and resources, and who suffers the negative consequences of particular activities. But it's also about who has the power to institutionalize their vision of the environment and of the human role therein. Many studies by political ecologists show how dispossession of resources by powerful actors goes hand in hand with the imposition of those actors' assumptions about what the environment is and how humans should relate to it. Finally, political ecologists are very often heard arguing that the participants in human affairs are not, in fact, exclusively human. Whether it's mosquitoes and the diseases they carry, or trees and the fires they create, humans must always contend with the organisms and biophysical processes that surround them. In this sense, studying politics means more than understanding how humans struggle with one another for resources or cultural hegemony. It also means understanding how a wide variety of different organisms interact to shape the world in particular ways. Finally, although there is no common political ideology among political ecologists, there is a definite tendency to seek greater social equity and to see social equity as an important factor in environmental sustainability. As we move through the course, you can decide for yourself whether you agree with the types of social changes that political ecologists often call for implicitly or explicitly. Now, when you read the chapters from Paul Robbins' Introduction to Political Ecology, pay attention to the distinction he draws between political ecology and apolitical ecology. How, according to Robbins, does a political ecology approach?
Okay, is the concept any clearer to all of you? Yes, students?
Yes, ma'am.
What about the rest of the
Yes,
class?
ma'am.
I can barely hear you.
Hello?
Yes, I can barely
Yes,
hear
ma'am.
all of you. You sound so sleepy, all of you, that when I'm asking you if political ecology as a concept is clear to all of you, it's like, yes, ma'am. So I'm asking, what about the rest of the people? Only Jay and Vasundhara have responded that the idea of political ecology is clearer to them. What is it that was unclear to you? Yes, students, what is it that you could not follow?
Was clearer, ma'am.
Hmm?
It was clearer.
It was. Okay. So, are there any questions so far?
Ma'am, in the second video, uh, uh, there was this point that was raised about the how the political forces equate to changes in the environment or the ecology of a certain area. So I wanted to ask, he referred to the changes as phenomena that happened on regional and above scale, not on local level. I wanted to know what does he meant from that.
See, when we talk about local level politics and when we talk about local politics, you must understand that from where he is coming. there will be a difference in perspectives with regard to the local phenomena, because the local is very diverse for every each one of us. How is it diverse? You need to understand that when we talk about local, for us, we actually have the smallest administrative unit in the form of local village pradhan or the panchayati raj system, which is not something which is there in other parts of the world. It is unique to India. The panchayati raj system is actually our local political level. Okay. Now, if you look at any kind of political scenario, uh, you will realize that the Panchayati Raj system also plays a very significant role in identifying how a small block or a small panchayat or a small village stays ecologically, politically, in whichever way possible. Okay, socially, how does it stay? Like, I don't want to use this as an example, but the recent tragedy that has struck in Uttar Pradesh with regard to a certain case, um, don't you think that the local village politics is a very micro level lens through which we can look at caste based politics in villages? So, while all of you in Delhi, when you are living in Delhi, you think that there is no caste system, or you believe that there should be no caste system, you are way beyond and way removed, far removed from the reality of an average Indian. Are you getting my point? So, he will not, as a faculty member, he will not be able to give you a universal example for local level politics. He will only be able to give you a global example. But to him, local understanding of politics was, just in the previous video, where when while introducing, he introduces New Zealand. Now what he says is that while New Zealand promotes a very good green image, at the same time you need to realize that despite being green, what is its lacunae? Where does it fall short? And the reason for it falling short is that the resource in New Zealand is far greater and the people in New Zealand are far less. And that is why he gave you the comparison. The previous video gave you the comparison of how climate in New Zealand is similar to Japan, because they're both somewhere located in the sea. The land area is the same, but there is a difference of 96 million people, which is there in Japan. And in Japan, while you may believe that it is a very technology oriented society, you will realize that even as a society, it is far more sustainable when compared to any other green nation. Are you getting my point? So, when I talk about local, you need to understand that local for every country of the world is very different. It is a variable idea. Okay, there is again one more short video that I will show you, which is about why is climate change so political. Just see that and then we shall discuss. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a moment.
Is, shall we surrender to our surroundings, or shall we make our peace with nature and begin to make reparations for the damage we have done to our air, to our land, and to our water?
What you just saw is a small sample from one of Richard Nixon's many speeches urging environmental action while he was president. Nixon was a Republican, but ran on a generous environmental agenda in 1968. How then do we get from this
We can make 1972 the best year ever for environmental progress
to this?
As we keep hearing that 2014 has been the warmest year on record, I asked the chair, you know what this is? It's a snowball. And and that's just from outside here. So it's very, very cold out.
A recent New York Times article points towards Citizens United, which ended corporate campaign finance restrictions, as one of the major causes of the recent polarization of climate change and environmentalism. But if we look back to the Reagan era in the 1980s, you can see this bifurcation already at work. So how did the overwhelming bipartisan support of environmental action in the 1970s become so fractured by the 1980s? Well, there are a lot of factors that influenced this shift, such as corporate backlash and the impact of conservative think tanks on political agendas. But one of the main causes was the rise of neoliberalism and a free market ideology. Ronald Reagan and fellow Republicans began championing a deregulation mindset in the hopes that the market would thrive without a clunky federal hand controlling it. However, this placed 1970s environmental laws firmly within the sights of anti-regulation crusaders. Richard Andrews, a professor emeritus of environmental policy at UNC Chapel Hill, describes Reagan's environmental approach in a radio interview for WNYC.
Rather than trying to reform or tweak the environmental regulations that had come into play in the 70s, he tried to just reverse them.
Ultimately, an environmental agenda ran counter to the core ideological tenets of the new Republican deregulation platform. In the eyes of free market Republicans, protecting America's environments meant placing unnecessary burdens on its businesses. As a result of this neoliberal Republican mindset, environmental progress suffered greatly. Reagan took many actions to distance himself from the 1970s environmental movement. He removed Jimmy Carter's solar heaters from the roof of the White House and appointed EPA Administrator Ann Gorsuch Beauford, who allowed for a steep decline in the number of cases filed against polluters. Thus, Reagan's presidential actions seemed to be the Republican Party's first steps towards an agenda that ignored and at times outright shunned environmental issues. Granted, George H.W. Bush still tried to hold on to some semblance of a pro-environment stance throughout his presidency, but by the 1990s and 2000s, many Republicans began to face a realization that Richard Andrews lays out later on in his interview.
The Republican Party generally decided that no matter how much they tried to burnish their environmental credentials, there would always be some Democratic opponent who would push for more government action than they were comfortable with as a party. And so they began to dig in deeper with the anti-environment constituencies and so forth, while the Democrats in turn said, okay, this is our winning issue, and the environmental groups can be our ground level support troops.
At the core of this Republican departure from environmental issues like climate change lies the party's resistance towards federal regulation and actions, especially when it comes to corporations. Andrews suggests that environmental issues are often so decisive nowadays, partly because the
environment has sort of been captured by this increasingly polarized partisan dynamic.
So a look towards the past reveals that there was a time when environmental issues like clean air and water were not tied to party lines, but instead just a simple question of human lives and existing ethically on this planet. Now problems like climate change and fracking have been molded into partisan weapons, which has created seemingly insurmountable gridlock. America's natural world then is inextricably connected to the political struggles on Capitol Hill, and not, as it should be, to questions of morality, health, and living well with our surroundings.
Okay. Uh, as you can see, this was an example that was primarily focused on United States of America and the politics of only 10 to 15 years. Okay. Uh, so now this is something which I want all of you to understand, that why political ecology has become such a relevant field and why must it be pursued. The reason for that is that the field of political ecology has come to the attention of people in the 1980s, 1990s, and if you will look, all the major global environmental policies have actually started being taken seriously from 1992, not before that. The reason for that was, I think, 1992 was the time when the Global Earth Summit took place, 1980s or 1992. I think it is 1992 when the Global Earth Summit took place in Rio de Janeiro. And the thing is that climate change, for that matter, is something which has become a very relevant field only because, not just because it talks about conservation, not just because it talks about restoring Earth's ecological balance. It has actually become a relevant field because if you look at climate change, and if you look at environment, you realize that human beings are taking advantage of these concerns as well, and they are taking political advantage of these concerns. And as I told you, if you just look at this very small idea of how Richard Nixon or how George W. Bush senior and how these people have approached, you will realize that politics and economics cannot be disregarded from the concerns of the environment. Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, but they also talked about a time when
Jay, could you
the
be
it,
louder, please?
yes, ma'am. Is this okay?
Yes, it is.
So, but they also they also talked about a time when these kind of environmental concerns were not related to any kind of politics or party agenda, but it was
So they
genuinely a
believed.
question.
Jay, so they believe that this did not gain too much of impetus in politics. See, I'll just explain to you a very simple thing. Uh, I I don't know how many of you are familiar with Saddam Hussein's regime. Is any one of you familiar with Saddam Hussein's regime?
Yes, ma'am.
Like not exactly what he did in the regime, but
Yes,
about
ma'am.
Okay,
Yes,
but a
ma'am.
little bit. I'm sure a little bit, you know. Okay. Do you know how he was killed?
and the America invaded and
Yeah,
killed him, saying that he was
yeah.
making.
Now, I will tell you one very important observation that political ecologists had to say, but nobody actually had the, you know, nobody actually had a say in that matter because the deed had already been done. While Saddam Hussein was, a dictator and a fascist leader, for many people, you need to understand that his terror was so far spread in the Middle East that he was actually capable of protecting the boundary of oil countries, okay, from the western powers. Otherwise, tell me something. A country which is right now fraught with incidents of racial violence in its own land, which is a human right violation on so many levels, why would a country like that actually bother to go and solve human right violations of any other nation when it is not able to contain its own incidents of intolerance? Do you have an answer to that? Why is America so involved and so, you can say, so in deeply, participatory towards the international politics? What is the reason?
To instill their dominance.
Do you really think it is just about instilling their dominance,
Not
Taji?
just about
Ma'am,
that, but
it's
I
all
think that
about
would be a core
resources.
reason, ma'am.
Yes, tell me. See, I'll tell you, India has long been accused of human rights violation in Kashmir. Okay, it has always been accused on an international platform, and there has been a lot of controversy and everything. And I completely understand, but don't you ever ask yourself that this is an issue between two nations, two neighboring nations, or three stakeholders, including the concern of Kashmiris? Why is it any of US's business to be all counselor like, to take the role of a counselor and try to counsel both the parties? Why is it in the interest of anyone, any international community, to actually take into consideration this issue? We know it is a domestic issue. It has always been clear that the only party that has been interested in the international politics is our neighboring nation that has some stake due to the religious majority in the state. Okay, now why has it become a matter of international interest when they themselves have so many concerns and issues? Why do you think? Why will it jump the gun and come to India? It has no ownership of any piece of land in India. It has no ownership of any piece of land in Pakistan. Why is it intervening between these two matters? Don't you ever feel like asking this question? It is in the, are they doing this in the interest of peace? What are they
Ma'am,
trying?
it's for
No, ma'am.
resources and for like like they actually sort of give warning to their neighbors as well, like the neighbors of it's global politics, and having relations with other countries show the dominance. And
Just
the if we say resources, so what happened in COVID-19 situation was like India supplied hydrochloroquine to America after it gave warning to India for retaliation. So that's also a factor, maybe.
anyone else?
Mom, mom, like if they do this, like coming in between two political parties, supposing India and Pakistan, and saying, like it's in order to form an alliance, because in order to form an alliance with the nations, because when that happens, the access of resources within these countries, or like I have seen US siding with India, so in order to get the access of resources in this country and then be exploited for the same, because we don't have any strict labor laws in that sense, and a lot of our
We don't have
workers
any strict labor laws. No,
Ma'am,
Vasundhara, we
I
do have.
not that I'm aware of, ma'am, because the laborers in factories, the minimum wage that they get is not something that is like is essential for their basic requirements of on a daily basis. So that these people can set up their factories in our country, make the products at a cheap rate in our countries, give it to us, give us the cheap quality, take back the good quality, and basically exploit our resources and have access to them in the name of being our protector.
Okay. I request all of you, now you are in fifth semester. Actually, not in fifth semester, you are virtually done with fifth semester. Um, my request to all of you is just one thing. Uh, Maybe no one will tell you, maybe not knowing is good, but I would just suggest that don't don't overlook what is happening around yourself, and don't overlook what is happening internationally, because there is a lot of correlation between what is happening with you and what is happening internationally. Please try to understand that uh, everything, every single policy, every single action, be it the local government or be it the international government, in some way or the other has a trickle down effect and has an impact on you as well. uh, so
Ma'am, I want to
this,
add one point.
yeah.
Ma'am, maybe to get the votes of Indian Americans in America.
Yes, yes, that can be considered, yes. But beyond that, please understand that as a nation, as a nation intervening in these, and why is it that United Nation Human Rights Commission, you, I'm sure you know UNHRC is a very important body.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Why, when UNHRC is so prompt in responding to the plight of an average Kashmiri, why is it not so prompt in responding to the plight of an average African American? Why is that? The incident, yes.
Does this have to do with the projection of a certain image by the country on a global platform?
Do you don't you think, Jay, that we are way past the projection of the country's image with the number of millions of memes that are being made for the US president? Don't you think we are way past the image of US president as it used to be until uh, Obama? At least there was a picture of dignity, and there was a picture of an educated, leader. And after that, it was all about where all has the present president been ridiculous and strange in his behavior. Don't you think that we are way past? And the whole 2 months phase of Black Lives Matter, don't you think that was something which did enough harm to the image? But why did UNHRC not release a blanket statement condemning the violence against African American? This is a very common sense based question. I
Ma'am,
don't want,
because of funding.
because of funding. Which
Funding.
funding? Which funding?
Ma'am, every country funds the international organizations. So the funding provided by USA is quite high as compared to other countries.
Hmm. Okay, okay. In that case, you really need to study about the establishment of United Nations, and you need to really study about how the establishment of United Nations serves the political interests of um, the white world and the Western world, and you need to understand what kind of control they have over it. Okay, so you haven't exposed yourself to nearly enough political, I would say, narratives to know. And that is where, your social awareness becomes limited. That is why I'm requesting all of you that when you pick up the newspaper, don't just read what is happening in your colony, or don't just read what is happening in Delhi, and don't just read those headlines that coincide with the flaming headlines of the news, television, and the media. Try to find out beyond that what is happening in the world, and you will be able to correlate so many narratives, so many discourses that are happening around the world, and you will be a better person and a well informed person at that. Okay, so don't just be a part of what the media is telling you. You have to go beyond that. How many of you actually look at news concerning climate change? None of you do that. You only look at it when it is there on the front page of the newspaper, or when it is being discussed that, oh, a lion was found walking, and a small video clip is shared on social media, and you are like, oh, they were walking on the road, and this is because of the lockdown. But you don't really understand the repercussions and the impacts of various climate change policies. How do they have an impact on a global environmental, on us on a global environmental level. If we are living in a polluted air, why are we living in a polluted environment? Whose work are we doing to be living in such a polluted environment? Why is a country with a negative carbon footprint known to have a negative carbon footprint? What is it that is protecting it? There are so many things that you need to understand before you venture into forming an opinion about it. Are you getting my point? It's very significant that you look at ecological policies and policies about environment from myriad perspectives. So Delhi has polluted air, Bombay has polluted air, but have you ever stopped to think why does it have this polluted air and why is the government not doing anything? What is it that is stopping the government from doing anything? Don't you think taking care of the environment is something which comes naturally to people or should come naturally to people? Then why don't people have climate change policies as part of priority? Why is it not there in their agenda? And why is it the international organization fighting and shouting at the top of their lungs in terms of fighting climate change, while at the same time it is just a nexus of various organizations where you tend to get lost? You have to really
Excuse me,
understand.
ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, actually, as you were speaking, I was thinking about a scenario where all this environment and like culture and politics is kind of playing together. So, if we consider the recent scenario, although I didn't want to take an example of this, but like if we consider the recent scenario for the past many months, like we have our news channels, the news channels and the political parties and all of those things. The issue of the pandemic and people dying and all of these things, they were kind of sidelined. And even like the recent scenario of the farmers as well, the bill passing and all that, they were kind of sidelined. But one particular case was highlighted to the limit where where people were kind of influenced to even just stop watching the news altogether. One particular case was highlighted that much. Is like, could this be a reason why US like takes part in or takes interest in the Kashmir side of our country and all this, so that the our attention from what is happening in their country, what is happening, like what all the things that are wrong with their country and the things that are happening wrong in their country, the our attention shifts from that.
Absolutely,
And
Vasundhara. The attention shifting is a very smart gimmick of every government. And when I take example of United States of America, please know that I'm not just talking about USA. I'm talking about entire Europe. I'm talking about the entire white world, and how always it has always been shifting the focus from themselves and from the human right violations that they have been doing, um, to various other non-immediate and fairly scandalous issues. Okay, if you look at media today, then you understand the sheer focus on the economic gains from the media. The fact is that sensationalizing news and sensationalizing specific headlines, yes, you say that you have lost appetite for something, but at the same time, you don't understand how certain people have actually gained momentum and gained popularity owing to this kind of, uh, you know, sensationalism. So you have to take into consideration various aspects of it. Yes, you will say that if I've stopped watching news, why is it that it is still going on? Who is giving them the money? Well, it took you 3 months to realize how your focus had been shifted from relevant issues, from very important issues, to something so petty that was universal knowledge always. It was always universal knowledge with regard to consumption of addictive substances. Wherever you go, where human beings are not working in decent working hours, you will find dependence on addictive substances. It is there among the fishermen community, it is there among students of various courses, anybody. Okay, do you understand? So keeping that in mind, please understand, please understand that yes, focus shifting is something which is very very important and has always been used as a tool, and it has not happened in the last 10-15 years. It has happened in the last 70-80 years. It has been happening where focus has been shifted. This is how you handle children, that if they are crying, if they are injured, their focus needs to be shifted from their injury to something else. This is how you do it. And this is not something which has been a technique of today, it is a technique of the past. Are you getting my point?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm stopping here and we'll meet next week. But I just want you to see certain cases, try to understand certain climate change issues and look at them from the perspective of global environmental politics. Please try and understand why, if there is so much of focus in Geneva, Switzerland, why is it that an average village in India, which has always, Indian politics has always been of interest to the world, why is it that a village, a small village in India, has never been able to get representation in COP summits? And why is it that the COP summit conclusions have never trickled down to the villages in India? Please try and find out these answers to these questions, and then you will understand what I mean and why political ecology should be of interest to all of you. Okay, so I'm stopping here. Thank you very much. I have another class. So